Kelvin, KTN News.
Okay. And of course, as earlier on teased, I have, I'm glad to have you, Ken, here with us. Looking at this particular issue, because there are kind of a convergence of issues from what I can see. For starters, we have the finance bill, which Kenyans have been involved in the discourse because of the taxation issue. But when you dig down to the root of the issue, it comes down to this issue of debt. And now some of our debts are maturing. Just listening to that particular item and the response from Treasury, how they will handle this maturing debt. Aren't we in a place where it's between a rock and a hard place?
Indeed, Noah, this is a developing story that is causing quite a bit of anxiety among investors. The fact that on June 24th next year, you'll have to make a bullet payment of $2 billion, and not forgetting all the other obligations the country has a lot of investors worried whether Kenya will default on its debt. So you're to your point that the finance bill has been geared towards raising as much revenue as is possible. The only problem is when you put in too many taxes on business, you end up slowing down the business environment. So the amount of revenue you had expected to get might not come. I think in terms of the response from Treasury, I feel like they're blowing hot and cold. A few months ago, they said that there was an entire dedicated team that's looking into the eurobond repayment, that's working around the clock. But in this particular interview, you see they talk about they're still looking at proposals in the market. So I think such communication gets people nervous, and that's why I think a lot of investors, sort of like from a credit rating perspective, that's the reason why you saw Kenya being downgraded.
Definitely. And we see one side of the coin where we need to raise more revenue to fulfill our debt obligation. The options at hand, the low-hanging fruit, other than what might hurt in regards to the revenue side of it, what options can Treasury explore?
I mean, there's always the refinancing option, but where the markets are right now, interest rates are quite high. So refinancing becomes quite a challenge. Then there's the other option of just looking for commercial loans to try and plug in the difference. But even that can be quite expensive. I think the lesson that comes out of this is really what is the purpose of the debt that we accrue as a country. And this is going to be the biggest debt payment. And I think at the beginning of this show, I said that, if you look at Kenya from the 1963 till today, the statistics are shocking. Our debt from 1963 till to date has gone up by 5,600 times. Our GDP in that period has gone up by 2,200 times. And even more shocking, the number of people employed between independence and today has only gone up 5 times. So first of all, you're saying the debt that we've accrued in these years doesn't even drive half the growth we expect. And even the growth that we get, it's not the growth that is creating jobs. So I think if there was ever an argument for Kenya getting a new economic model, I think the eurobond situation is going to magnify that conversation in a way that's never been.
Definitely. And when the new government came in and we saw the cabinet secretary, Professor Ndungu, being vetted and talking about markets being the priority of his approach, and also, using the tools at hand to sort of bring to life the bottom-up economic model. Looking at it so far, are we seeing, I don't know what the reference is about monkeys and forests, but are we forced, based on where we are, to resort to the usual, or are we seeing sort of a new approach with the new government on this issue? of debt?
I was expecting a new approach, but what we are seeing is more of an extension of the same. I was expecting for them at least to say we're going to put a cap on spending for the next 5 years and just let those revenues catch up with expenditure, and eventually our deficits will become a surplus. That's what the Americans right now are talking about in their country as a way of treating the debt solution there. But if you look at the proposed budget, spending is going up. And, at a time when, the mantra was we need to cut back on debt, we need to stop digging the hole. That was the analogy that was being used. But if you look at spending, it's going up. So for me, it shocks me that we've not gotten to the point where you said we need to cap spending at least for 5 years, and use what we have at least to be able to reduce the deficit. Because when you reduce that deficit, you reduce borrowing. When you reduce borrowing, interest rates start coming down, and banks are now forced to lend to the private sector. All these gentlemen here worked in the Kibaki administration, and that was really the secret bullet. The fact that they're unable to replicate that, for me, I think it's quite shocking, really.
Can time sort of give an opportunity to turn this around? Because there is that argument that you've just stepped into office, you haven't even breathed. Yes, I know we have these economic challenges and we are trying to resolve them. Can time vindicate this team?
They still have plenty of time, and you're absolutely right. This financial year had already been budgeted for by the previous administration, and that's why the proposed finance bill was supposed to be really their debut as the Kenya Kwanza administration. And I think many people were expecting to see some more fiscal discipline than we had seen in the past. But you look at it, it's really quite similar to what we had in previous administrations.
Definitely. At this particular moment, talking about the investment forum that I just teased earlier on, told the president, William Ruto, is speaking at Serena in this particular investment forum. Let's listen in.
Critical enabler in the achievement of Kenya's Vision 2030, and has played a central role in supporting the country's developmental agenda across other sectors.
Okay, those are very nice videos of Nairobi, and I think it's one of the items. Later on, the president will be speaking in that particular function. Sometimes you just tend to pick it at the wrong time, It happens in life. But Ken, I don't know, in regards to lender of last resort, because we are in a program, we need to borrow to get ourselves out of this situation, and we are always having that budget deficit that we need to borrow. And now we're seeing more conditions coming in. That issue of spending that you brought up earlier on, it seems to be the most forgotten in all the programs that I've seen, because spending is always going up. But they'll rework the taxes bit of it, So, in terms of how to work with, institutions like the IMF, how should that work ideally?
Well, you see, with the IMF is what we call concessional funding, which means that there will be conditions attached to that. And I think we're in the middle of a 38-month program, and I think they've extended it a bit. My opinion is we should have looked at what's happening in the US right now. The whole debt ceiling debate, has been really about the US capping spending for about 10 years, what they call non-defense spending. So anything that's not tied to security. And I think we should have gone that path, because if you are going to cure this deficit, at some point, you need to stop increasing the credit card, the limit of the credit card. We need to have a limit so that even as the country continues raising its revenues in first, second, third year, the deficit becomes narrower and narrower. And eventually, we start running a surplus. This country has run a surplus in the past a couple of times. So it's not something that's impossible. During Mwai Kibaki's first year, we ran a surplus as a country. So I think that's the conversation you need to have with the IMF. I think you need to have a 5-year plan and saying we are putting a cap on spending and we're going to reduce the deficit slowly, and hopefully within 5 years we should be running a surplus.
Because Kenyans, we've become very sensitive to government spending. I was observing Madaraka Day celebration, and one of the issues that really came out strongly on social media was one of the cars that one of the top officials is using as an official car. People Google and they see, oh, you're using a 40 million plus worth of car just to move around in this economy. Initially, most people wouldn't have paid attention to that, but now we are paying attention. In regards to some of the areas that could be tweaked when we talk about spending, I remember when the former president, Uhuru Kenyatta, when he was at Treasury, he suggested now we are dropping Gazlas. Let us save on fuel budget and use Passats. I don't know how that worked out, yeah? But what are some of the areas when you talk about government spending that could be altered to sort of help, give that soft landing for all of us?
Well, I don't think you should have a blanket solution to that. I think the best advice would be an advisory going to CEOs of parastatals and ministers, asking them that you need solutions on things they can do to cut it, because every organization has different dynamics. You can't have a one-size-fits-all, but you can request that every ministry, every parastatal, every month gives you some savings that will not significantly affect the operations. When that has happened, then it means every entity has to look at its own space and see what it can give up and what it can't, because the cultures are different. Everything is different. So I think it's working with the heads of these entities and requesting them that we need to have, well, first of all, put a cap, because most of these entities request for more allocations every year, and to say, no, next year we need to work with what everybody is having right now, unless it's something tied to security or it's an emergency. So I think that's the best way. Otherwise, if you have a one-size-fits-all, it never really works.
Yeah. Now, I was looking at the new constitution, and one of the propositions that sort of a lot of Kenyans looked at it and are like, this would make a lot of sense and help us move forward, was the issue of bringing in technocrats. So tap into people who've made tremendous, movement and in the private sector, and they have made a name for themselves and utilize that even in the public sector. And we've seen that with cabinet secretaries, for example. I'm just thinking, over time, the balance between the politics and the actual economics, because I find that is also one of those balls that we're trying to juggle as a government, settling politically and also dealing with an economic issues. As an economist, how do you process that?
Well, the private sector and the public sector are very different. The constraints of both entities are very different. And sometimes what you've said on paper sounds really, really good, but what we've seen in practice can lead to unintended consequences. I've always favored growing people from within. So if you have these entities that have been there for many years, trying to look at who are the good elements within and try to grow them, because they understand the entire dynamics, the politics, the landscape of the place, which is very important. So I think you should always give first priority to people who within those entities are doing well, and sort of give them more responsibilities and ask them for solutions. Otherwise, if you are always dependent on external people who don't understand the context, only look at spreadsheets, you might start having some challenges.
Exactly. And Ken, I don't know how many minutes do we have before the break, Director? All right, we are taking a break right now. But there is this issue of CBK, governor position. We have the current governor and we have the governor nominee. And already we are seeing, they are seeing two sides of a similar coin. We'll discuss that, what Tuge portends for this country, and what Njoroge thinks from the little that is spoken about in response to what the former had suggested when he was being vetted in Parliament. Well, we take a short break right here on Business Today. Remember, Investment Forum ongoing. President is there. We'll be keen to listen into that discussion. Stay tuned.